On a Wednesday morning in late April, Diana Thornton walked into Conference Room 3B on the 17th floor of the glass tower in downtown Boston that housed the headquarters of Meridian Strategic Advisors, leading a presentation to a new client worth potentially $12 million in annual consulting fees, and watched as the client, a man named Robert Hutchins, who was the chief operating officer of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company called BioNorth Solutions, directed every single one of his questions, comments, and eye contact toward Tyler Whitmore, a 23-year-old white intern who had been with Meridian for exactly 4 months and whose primary contribution to the presentation had been formatting the PowerPoint slides. Diana was 42 years old, a senior vice president who had been with Meridian for 14 years, who had an MBA from Wharton and a track record of leading transformations for Fortune 500 companies, who had personally developed the strategic framework that could save BioNorth from the operational crisis it was facing. And yet, for the entire 90-minute meeting, Robert Hutchins spoke to her exactly twice, both times in response to direct questions she had asked him, and both times with the kind of clipped, dismissive tone you might use with a receptionist who was taking too long to transfer your call. And when the meeting ended and Robert stood to shake hands, he gripped Tyler's hand firmly, looked him in the eye and said, "Great work, really impressive stuff," while offering Diana a brief nod and a handshake so limp it felt like an afterthought. Diana Thornton had built her career on competence, discipline, and an almost superhuman ability to absorb disrespect without showing it on her face. She was 5'7", with dark brown skin, natural hair she wore in a professional twist-out, and a wardrobe of tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had grown up in South Boston, the daughter of a postal worker and a nurse, and she had learned early that being black and female meant you had to be twice as good to get half as far. She had graduated summa cum laude from Boston University, worked for 3 years at McKinsey, and then joined Meridian Strategic Advisors when it was still a mid-sized firm with ambitions of competing with the big consultancies. Over 14 years, Diana had helped build Meridian into one of the most respected strategy firms in the Northeast, bringing in over $200 million in revenue from clients she had personally secured and managed. She was one of 3 black senior vice presidents at Meridian, one of only 7 women at that level, and she was on track to make partner within the next 2 years if everything went according to plan. BioNorth Solutions was supposed to be her signature win, the kind of engagement that would prove she could land and lead major accounts, the kind that would make her partnership inevitable. The company was a regional pharmaceutical manufacturer based in Burlington, Massachusetts, about 15 miles northwest of Boston, with annual revenues around $600 million and a workforce of about 1,200 people. BioNorth had been struggling for the past 3 years, facing increasing competition from generic manufacturers, regulatory challenges, and operational inefficiencies that were eating into their margins. Their board had hired a new CEO 6 months earlier, a woman named Patricia Danvers, who had come from Pfizer, and Patricia had immediately begun looking for outside help to turn the company around. She had reached out to several consulting firms, and Meridian had been one of them. Diana had led the pitch. She had spent 2 weeks working with her team to develop a comprehensive diagnostic of BioNorth's challenges and a proposed approach for addressing them. The presentation had been sharp, data-driven, and tailored specifically to BioNorth's situation, and Patricia Danvers had been impressed. She had told Diana that Meridian's proposal was the strongest she had seen, and she had indicated that she wanted to move forward. But there was one complication. Patricia's COO, Robert Hutchins, had to sign off on any major consulting engagement, and he had been skeptical of bringing in outside advisors. Patricia had asked Diana to come in and present directly to Robert to get him on board. Diana had agreed, and she had brought Tyler Whitmore along as support. Tyler was a recent graduate from Dartmouth, smart enough but still learning the basics of consulting, and Diana had assigned him to the BioNorth project primarily to give him exposure to client interactions. She had not expected him to contribute much to the meeting beyond pulling up slides and taking notes. But from the moment Robert Hutchins walked into the conference room that morning, it had been clear that he had made assumptions about who was leading the engagement, and those assumptions had nothing to do with titles or expertise. The meeting had started normally enough. Diana had welcomed Robert, introduced herself and Tyler, and outlined the agenda. But when she began walking through the findings from Meridian's diagnostic, presenting the data on BioNorth's operational inefficiencies and the opportunities for improvement, Robert had interrupted her within 5 minutes. "So what is the timeline for implementation?" Robert had asked, looking directly at Tyler. Tyler, caught off guard, had glanced at Diana. I think Diana can speak to that." But Robert had not looked at Diana. He had kept his eyes on Tyler, waiting for an answer. Diana had stepped in smoothly, saying, "We propose a phased approach over 18 months, starting with quick wins in procurement and logistics, then moving to more complex operational redesigns." Robert had nodded, but he had still been looking at Tyler when he said, "And what is the expected return on investment?" Again, Tyler had looked to Diana, and again, Diana had answered, walking through the financial projections, the cost savings, the revenue upside. But Robert had kept directing his questions to Tyler, kept looking at Tyler, kept treating Tyler as if he was the senior person in the room. And Tyler, to his credit, had tried to redirect the conversation to Diana, saying things like, "Diana has more detail on that," or "I will let Diana walk you through the approach." But it had not mattered. Robert had been locked in. About halfway through the meeting, Diana had decided to test something. She had stopped volunteering information and had waited to see what Robert would do, and what he had done was turn to Tyler and say, "So Tyler, can you walk me through the implementation roadmap?" Tyler had hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and then had said, "Actually, Diana developed the roadmap. I think she should present it." Robert had finally looked at Diana, his expression mildly irritated, as if she was being difficult by existing in the room. "Fine, go ahead." Diana had walked through the roadmap, laying out each phase, each milestone, each deliverable, and Robert had listened with his arms crossed, his face impassive. And when she finished, he had turned back to Tyler and said, "What do you think, Tyler? Does this seem realistic?" It was at that moment that Diana had understood this was not just unconscious bias or a misunderstanding about roles. This was deliberate. Robert Hutchins had decided, based on nothing more than appearance, that Tyler was the person worth engaging with, and Diana was just background noise. And the realization had settled over her like cold water. She could have called it out right there. Could have said something like, "Robert, I am the senior vice president leading this engagement, and I would appreciate it if you directed your questions to me." But she had learned over the years that calling out bias in the moment often backfired. The person doing it got defensive, the meeting became uncomfortable, and you ended up being labeled as difficult or overly sensitive. So Diana had stayed silent, finished the presentation, and shaken Robert's limp hand at the end. After Robert left, Tyler had stood in the conference room, looking stricken. "Diana, I am so sorry. That was incredibly uncomfortable. I tried to redirect him to you, but he just kept asking me questions." Diana had smiled, the professional smile she had perfected over years of navigating rooms where she was the only black woman. "It is fine, Tyler. You handled it well." "It is not fine. That was disrespectful. Should we say something to Patricia?" Diana had considered it. Patricia Danvers had been supportive, had treated Diana with respect and professionalism. But Patricia was new to BioNorth, still building her own credibility, and Diana did not want to put her in the position of having to choose between a consultant and her COO. Not yet, anyway. "Let me think about it," Diana had said. For now, let us just focus on getting the engagement approved." But as Diana walked back to her office after the meeting, she had felt the anger building. The kind of anger that came from years of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. And she had started to think about what her next move should be. If you have ever been in a room where your expertise was ignored because of how you looked, hit that like button. Because what Diana did next would not only change the trajectory of her career, but would send a message that reverberated throughout the entire consulting industry about the cost of underestimating competence. Diana sat in her office for the rest of the afternoon, reviewing the BioNorth proposal and thinking about her options. She could proceed as planned, let the engagement move forward, and try to manage Robert's behavior once the project started. But she knew from experience that if Robert treated her this way in an initial pitch meeting, it would only get worse once they were in the operational details of the engagement. He would question her recommendations, second-guess her decisions, and likely credit any successes to Tyler or other members of the team. Diana had seen this pattern before, and she knew how it ended, with her doing all the work and someone else getting the recognition. She could also escalate the issue to Patricia Danvers, explain what had happened, and ask for Robert to be removed from the oversight role. But that was risky. It could make Diana look like she was unable to manage difficult stakeholders, which was a key part of consulting, and it could sour the relationship before the engagement even started. Or she could do something else entirely. She could walk away. She could recommend that Meridian decline the engagement, citing concerns about client readiness or strategic fit or some other polite corporate euphemism. It would mean losing $12 million in potential revenue, which would not make her popular with the Meridian leadership. But it would also mean protecting her own reputation, her own time, and her own dignity. Diana was still weighing these options when her phone rang. It was Patricia Danvers. "Diana, hi. Do you have a minute?" "Of course. How can I help?" "I just got out of a meeting with Robert. He said the presentation this morning was fine, but he is not convinced we need Meridian's help. He thinks we can handle the operational improvements internally." Diana felt her stomach tighten. "I see. What are your thoughts?" Patricia sighed. "Honestly, I disagree with him. I think we need outside expertise, and I think Meridian's approach is exactly what we need. But Robert has influence with the board, and I do not want to push forward if he is going to be resistant. So I am trying to figure out how to bring him around." Diana took a breath. This was the moment. She could stay silent, let Patricia fight the battle, and hope it worked out. Or she could speak up. "Patricia, can I ask you something? Was Robert in the room when you and I met to discuss the initial proposal?" "No, he was traveling." "Why?" "Because I think it might be helpful for you to know what happened in this morning's meeting. Robert spent the entire 90 minutes directing his questions and comments to Tyler Whitmore, our intern, and almost completely ignored me. Even when Tyler tried to redirect him to me, Robert kept engaging with Tyler as if he was the senior person in the room." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Patricia said, her voice careful, "Are you saying Robert was dismissive because of your race or gender?" "I am saying that Robert made assumptions about who was leading the engagement, and those assumptions were not based on titles, experience, or expertise. You can draw your own conclusions about what they were based on." Patricia was quiet again. "Diana, I am sorry. That is not acceptable. Let me talk to Robert." "Patricia, I appreciate that. But before you do, I need to tell you something. Meridian prides itself on working with clients who value our expertise and treat our team with respect. If Robert is going to be involved in this engagement, and if he is going to continue to behave this way, then I am not sure this is the right fit for either of us." "Are you saying you would walk away from the engagement?" "I am saying I need to make sure that if we move forward, we are set up for success. And that means having a client who respects the people doing the work." Patricia took a breath. I understand. Let me talk to Robert and see if I can address this. Can you give me a day or two? Of course. Diana hung up and sat back in her chair. She had drawn a line. Now she had to see if Patricia would respect it. 2 days later, Patricia called back. Diana, I had a conversation with Robert. I explained that you are the senior vice president leading the engagement and that he needs to work directly with you. He acknowledged that he may have been unclear about roles in the meeting, and he said he is open to moving forward. Diana noted the phrasing. Robert had not apologized. He had not admitted that his behavior was inappropriate. He had simply said he was unclear about roles, as if the problem was a misunderstanding rather than a pattern of bias. But Patricia was trying, and Diana appreciated that. All right, Diana said, I am willing to move forward, but I want to set some clear expectations. I will be the primary point of contact for Meridian. All strategic decisions will go through me, and if there are concerns about the engagement, they should be raised with me directly. Does Robert understand that? He does. I made it very clear. Then let us proceed. The engagement was approved the following week. Diana assembled her team, a group of 5 consultants, including Tyler, and they began the diagnostic phase, spending 2 weeks on site at BioNorth's facilities, interviewing employees, reviewing processes, and analyzing data. Robert Hutchins was civil during this phase, attending meetings and answering questions, but he was noticeably cool toward Diana. He did not direct questions to Tyler anymore, but he also did not engage with Diana beyond what was strictly necessary. And Diana could tell that he resented being told to work with her. About a month into the engagement, Diana identified a major problem. BioNorth's procurement process was a disaster. The company was spending over $100 million annually on raw materials, supplies, and services, but there was no centralized oversight. Different departments were negotiating their own contracts, often with the same suppliers, and as a result, BioNorth was paying wildly inconsistent prices for the same goods. Diana's team estimated that by consolidating procurement and renegotiating contracts, BioNorth could save at least $15 million annually, possibly more. Diana presented the findings to Patricia and Robert in a meeting at BioNorth's headquarters. She walked them through the data, showed them examples of the price discrepancies, and outlined a plan for centralizing procurement under a new Chief Procurement Officer role. Patricia was enthusiastic, asking detailed questions about implementation and timeline. Robert was skeptical. This seems risky, Robert said, his arms crossed. If we centralize procurement, we lose flexibility. Departments need to be able to make their own decisions about what they buy and who they buy it from. Diana had anticipated this objection. I understand the concern, but the data shows that the current decentralized approach is costing BioNorth millions of dollars. We are not suggesting that departments lose all autonomy. We are suggesting that high-volume, high-value purchases go through a centralized process to ensure we are getting the best prices and terms. Individual departments can still make decisions about smaller, specialized purchases. And who is going to run this centralized procurement function? We recommend hiring a chief procurement officer with experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Someone who understands the regulatory requirements and the supplier landscape. Robert shook his head. That is going to add headcount, which costs money, and it is going to take time to find the right person. I am not convinced the savings justify the investment. Patricia leaned forward. Robert, the data is pretty compelling. $15 million in annual savings is significant. Even if we spend $500,000 on a new CPO and their team, we are still looking at a huge return. Maybe, but I want to see more analysis. I want to understand the risks, the implementation challenges, the potential downsides. Diana nodded. Of course, we can provide additional analysis, but I want to flag that the longer we wait to act on this, the more money BioNorth is losing. Every month that goes by is another $1 million out the door. Robert gave her a look that Diana could not quite read. Then I guess you better move quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, Diana and her team prepared an exhaustive analysis of the procurement opportunity, including risk assessments, implementation plans, and financial projections under different scenarios. They worked nights and weekends, refining the recommendations, and Diana personally reviewed every page to make sure it was bulletproof. When they presented the final report to Robert and Patricia, it was over 100 pages of detailed, data-driven analysis. Patricia loved it. She approved the recommendation on the spot and asked Diana to start identifying candidates for the Chief Procurement Officer role. Robert said he needed more time to review the details, but he did not object. 3 weeks later, BioNorth hired a Chief Procurement Officer, a woman named Karen Mendez, who had 20 years of experience in pharmaceutical supply chain management. Karen started the consolidation process, and within 4 months, the savings started to materialize. The first quarterly report showed a reduction in procurement costs of over $4 million, exactly in line with Diana's projections. Patricia sent Diana an email saying, "This is incredible work. You were right about everything." But Robert was silent. He did not acknowledge the success, did not congratulate Diana or her team, did not even send a perfunctory thank you email. And Diana started to notice something else. In meetings, Robert would take credit for the procurement initiative, describing it as something we had decided to do, as if it had been his idea all along. In one board meeting that Diana was not invited to, Robert had apparently presented the savings as a result of his operational leadership with no mention of Meridian's role. Diana only found out about it because Patricia had pulled her aside afterward and apologized, saying, "I tried to correct the record, but Robert had already moved on to the next agenda item." Diana was furious, but she did not show it. She continued to lead the engagement, moving on to the next phase of the transformation, which involved redesigning BioNorth's manufacturing processes to improve efficiency. The work was complex and demanding, requiring deep dives into production workflows, equipment utilization, and quality control procedures. Diana's team spent months on site, working closely with BioNorth's operations staff, and they developed a set of recommendations that could increase production capacity by 20% without requiring significant capital investment. But as Diana prepared to present these recommendations to the BioNorth leadership team, she started to hear rumblings. One of her team members, a consultant named Raj Patel, pulled her aside and said, "Diana, I do not know if this is relevant, but I overheard Robert talking to one of the plant managers yesterday. He was saying that he thinks Meridian's recommendations are too theoretical, that we do not understand the realities of pharmaceutical manufacturing. He also said something about how consultants always overpromise and underdeliver, and he's going to make sure we are held accountable." Diana thanked Raj and filed the information away. She was not surprised. Robert had been looking for ways to undermine the engagement from the beginning, and now he was setting the stage to blame Meridian if anything went wrong. The presentation on manufacturing improvements was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in late November, about 8 months into the engagement. Diana arrived at BioNorth's headquarters early, set up the conference room, and ran through the presentation one final time with her team. She was confident in the recommendations. The data was solid, the approach was sound, and the financial projections were conservative. But she also knew that Robert was going to be difficult. The meeting started at 2 o'clock. Patricia was there, along with Robert and several other members of the BioNorth leadership team, including the heads of manufacturing, quality, and engineering. Diana walked them through the findings, showing how BioNorth could optimize production schedules, reduce downtime, and improve equipment utilization. She presented case studies from other pharmaceutical manufacturers who had implemented similar changes and had seen significant results. And she outlined an implementation plan that would minimize disruption and risk. When she finished, Patricia asked several thoughtful questions, and the manufacturing lead, a man named Tom Brennan, seemed genuinely interested in the recommendations. But Robert was silent, his arms crossed, his face impassive. And when Patricia asked if there were any other questions, Robert finally spoke. "I have a concern," Robert said, looking directly at Diana for the first time in weeks. "These recommendations assume that our production staff are going to embrace these changes. But in my experience, frontline workers resist this kind of operational redesign. They see it as a threat to their jobs, or as consultants telling them how to do their work. How are you planning to address that?" Diana had anticipated this question. "We are recommending a comprehensive change management program, including training, communication, and incentives for employees who adopt the new processes. We have also built in time for feedback and iteration, so that workers feel like they have a voice in the process." "And how much is this change management program going to cost?" "We estimate about $2 million over the course of the implementation." Robert leaned back in his chair. $2 million for training and communication. That seems excessive. It is an investment in ensuring the success of the transformation. Without effective change management, even the best operational redesigns fail. Or, Robert said, his tone sharp, it is consultants padding their fees. The room went silent. Diana felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. "Robert, the change management program is a best practice in operational transformations. If you look at the case studies I presented, you will see that the companies who invested in change management achieved better results than those who did not. I looked at the case studies, and I'm not convinced they are relevant to BioNorth. We have a different culture, different workforce, different challenges." Patricia stepped in. "Robert, I think Diana's recommendations are sound. I want to move forward with the manufacturing improvements, including the change management program." Robert turned to Patricia. "Patricia, I respect your judgment, but I think we need to be careful here. We have already spent a lot of money on Meridian's engagement, and I am not seeing the return we were promised." "We have saved over $15 million on procurement," Patricia said, her voice firm. "That is a significant return." "Sure, on procurement. But manufacturing is different. It is more complex, higher risk, and I do not think Meridian has the expertise to navigate it." Diana felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Robert, my team includes 2 consultants with over 15 years of experience in pharmaceutical manufacturing. We have successfully led similar transformations at 3 other companies. I am confident we have the expertise to support BioNorth." Robert looked at her, and for a moment Diana saw something in his eyes. Not skepticism or concern, but contempt. He did not believe she was capable, and he was not going to be convinced otherwise. "I am going to recommend to the board that we pause the Meridian engagement," Robert said, "at least until we have a clearer sense of the risks and benefits." Patricia's face flushed. "Robert, that is a significant decision. We should discuss this offline before making any announcements." "I am just sharing my perspective. The board will make the final call." The meeting ended shortly after, and Diana and her team packed up their materials in silence. As they left the building, Tyler, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, said, "That was brutal. Is he really going to kill the engagement?" Diana did not answer right away. She was thinking about Robert's words, his tone, his expression. And she was thinking about what came next, because she had a choice. She could fight to keep the engagement, could lobby Patricia and the board, could try to prove Robert wrong, or she could do something else. That evening, Diana sat in her office at Meridian, staring at her computer screen. She pulled up the contract for the BioNorth engagement, reviewed the terms, and looked at the payment schedule. BioNorth had already paid Meridian about $7 million, and they owed another $5 million over the course of the remaining work. But buried in the contract was a clause that Diana had insisted on including during the negotiation, a clause that most clients agreed to without much thought because it was boilerplate language. The clause said that if the client terminated the engagement without cause, they would owe Meridian the full value of the remaining contract as a termination fee. Diana picked up her phone and called Patricia Danvers. It was after 8 o'clock, but Patricia answered. "Diana, hi. I'm so sorry about today. Robert was out of line." "I appreciate that, Patricia, but I need to have a difficult conversation with you." "Okay. What is it?" "I have been thinking about Robert's comments and about the dynamics of this engagement, and I do not think it is working. Robert does not trust me, he does not trust my team, and he is actively working to undermine the project. I've tried to manage it. I've tried to be professional, but at this point I think it is in everyone's best interest if Meridian steps back." There was a long silence. "Diana, I do not want you to step back. I think your work has been excellent. I think the recommendations are sound, and I think Robert is wrong. I believe you. But Patricia, the reality is that if Robert is going to fight us every step of the way, this engagement is not going to succeed. And I would rather walk away now than spend the next 6 months in a battle that we are not going to win." "So you are saying you want to terminate the contract?" "I'm saying I think it is time to reassess whether this is the right partnership." Patricia sighed. "Let me talk to the board. Let me see if I can get Robert to back off. Please do not make any decisions yet." "All right. But Patricia, I need you to understand something. Meridian has put our best people on this engagement. We have delivered strong results. And if Robert is going to take credit for our work and then turn around and question our expertise, that is not a partnership I am interested in continuing." "I understand. Let me see what I can do." Diana hung up and sat back in her chair. She had put the ball in Patricia's court. Now she would see what happened. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that walking away from disrespect is sometimes the most powerful move you can make, because what Diana did next would not only protect her own integrity, but would cost BioNorth far more than anyone had anticipated. Over the next week, Diana waited to hear from Patricia. She continued to manage the engagement, but she also started preparing for the possibility that it would end. She documented all the work Meridian had done, all the recommendations they had made, and all the value they had delivered. She reviewed the contract again, paying close attention to the termination clause, and she had a quiet conversation with her boss, the managing partner of Meridian, a man named Charles Wainwright, to give him a heads up about what might be coming. Charles was a white man in his early 60s, a former partner at Bain, who had joined Meridian to help build the firm into a major player. He and Diana had always had a good working relationship, and he trusted her judgment. When Diana explained the situation, Charles listened carefully and then said, "So you are thinking of walking away from a $12 million engagement because the client's COO is difficult to work with. I am thinking of protecting our reputation and our people. If we stay and Robert continues to undermine us, we are going to end up with a failed engagement on our record, and that is going to hurt us a lot more than losing this one client. But we have already done good work. The procurement savings alone are worth $15 million. That is a win. It is a win that Robert is taking credit for, and if we continue and the manufacturing improvements do not go as planned, Robert is going to blame us. We will get all the downside and none of the upside." Charles thought about it. "You know, if we terminate the engagement, we can invoke the termination fee. That is another $5 million. "I know, but it is also going to create bad blood. BioNorth will be angry, they will probably badmouth us in the industry, and we might lose future opportunities." "True. But Diana, you have been doing this long enough to know that some clients are not worth keeping. If Robert Hutchins is as toxic as you are describing, then maybe it is better to cut our losses and move on." "That is what I am thinking." "All right. You have my support. If you decide to pull the plug, I will back you." The next day, Patricia called Diana. Her voice was strained. "Diana, I have been in discussions with the board. And I have to be honest with you. Robert has convinced them that the Meridian engagement is not delivering value. They are voting tomorrow on whether to continue. Diana felt her stomach tighten. What do you think they are going to decide? I think they are going to side with Robert. He has more tenure, more relationships, and he has framed this as a financial issue. He is saying we are spending too much on consulting and not getting enough return, even though we have already saved them $15 million on procurement. He is downplaying that. He is saying the procurement savings would have happened anyway, and that Meridian is just taking credit for work that was already in progress. Diana closed her eyes. She had known this was coming, but it still stung. Patricia, I want to be clear. If the board terminates the engagement, Meridian is going to enforce the termination fee. That is $5 million. There was a pause. I understand. That is in the contract. It is. And I want you to know that I am sorry it came to this. I think you are a good leader, and I think BioNorth has a lot of potential. But I cannot continue to work with a client who does not respect my team or our work. I understand. And Diana, for what it is worth, I am sorry. I should have managed Robert better. The next day, Patricia called again. The board voted to terminate the engagement. Robert convinced them it was the right move. I pushed back, but I was outvoted. I appreciate you trying. We will send over the termination notice and the invoice for the termination fee. Diana, one more thing. Robert is arguing that we should not have to pay the termination fee. He is saying that Meridian did not deliver on the contract and that we have grounds to terminate for cause. Diana felt the anger flare. That is absurd. We delivered everything we promised. We saved BioNorth $15 million. We developed a comprehensive plan for manufacturing improvements. If Robert wants to argue that we did not perform, we will be happy to litigate it. I do not think it will come to that, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Diana hung up and immediately called Gerald Foster, Meridian's general counsel. She explained the situation, and Gerald said he would draft a termination notice and a demand letter for the $5 million fee. If they refuse to pay, Gerald said, we will file a breach of contract claim. And frankly, Diana, we have a strong case. The contract is clear. We performed our obligations, and they terminated without cause. They owe us the money. How long will it take to get the money if they fight it? If it goes to litigation, probably a year or more. But my guess is they will settle once they see how strong our case is. Most companies do not want the publicity of a lawsuit, especially one where they are clearly in the wrong. All right, let us send the demand letter and see what happens. But the demand letter went out the following week. It was polite but firm, outlining the work Meridian had done, the value delivered, and the contractual obligation to pay the termination fee. It gave BioNorth 30 days to pay or face legal action. 2 weeks later, Diana received a call from a lawyer representing BioNorth, a man named Andrew Keller. Andrew was with a large Boston law firm, and his tone was professional but adversarial. Ms. Thornton, I am calling regarding the termination fee demand. My client believes that Meridian did not perform under the contract and that BioNorth has grounds to terminate for cause. Therefore, we are not going to pay the $5 million. Diana had expected this. Mr. Keller, your client is welcome to that position, but it is not supported by the facts. Meridian delivered all the work outlined in the contract. We saved BioNorth over $15 million on procurement. We developed comprehensive recommendations for manufacturing improvements, and we did all of this on time and on budget. If your client wants to argue otherwise, we will be happy to present our case in court. We are prepared to litigate if necessary, but I'm calling to see if there is a path to resolution. Would Meridian be willing to reduce the termination fee in exchange for a mutual release? Diana thought about it. She could negotiate, could agree to take 2 or 3 million instead of 5, and avoid the time and expense of litigation. But something in her resisted. This was not just about the money. It was about the principle. BioNorth, and specifically Robert Hutchins, had treated her and her team with disrespect, had dismissed their expertise, and had then tried to avoid paying what they owed. And Diana was not interested in making it easy for them. "No," Diana said. "The termination fee is $5 million, as outlined in the contract. If BioNorth wants to pay it, we can close this matter. If not, we will see you in court." There was a pause. "I will convey your position to my client." Diana hung up and sat back in her chair. She knew she was taking a risk. Litigation was expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. But she also knew that Meridian had a strong case, and she believed that BioNorth would eventually pay rather than go through a public trial. 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon, Andrew Keller called back. "Ms. Thornton, my client has agreed to pay the termination fee. We will wire the funds within 5 business days." Diana felt a surge of satisfaction. "Thank you, Mr. Keller. We appreciate your client's cooperation." She hung up and immediately called Charles Wainwright. "Charles, they are paying. All $5 million. Charles laughed. "I had a feeling they would. Nice work, Diana. You played this perfectly." But Diana was not done, because while BioNorth was paying the termination fee, there was something else that was about to cost them a lot more. Diana had kept in touch with Karen Mendez, the chief procurement officer that BioNorth had hired based on Meridian's recommendation, and Karen had recently reached out to Diana with some interesting information. "Diana, I do not know if you have heard, but things are not going well here. After you left, Robert convinced the board to halt the manufacturing improvements. He said they were too risky. So we are still operating with the same inefficiencies you identified, and it is costing us a lot." "How much?" "I ran the numbers. If we had implemented your recommendations, we would have increased production capacity by 20%, which translates to about $40 million in additional revenue annually. We have now lost almost a year. So that is roughly $40 million in foregone revenue. On top of that, we are still burning money on inefficient processes. I estimate the total cost of Robert's decision to halt the improvements is around $50 to $60 million when you factor in lost revenue and ongoing inefficiencies." Diana had done the math in her head. 50 to 60 million, and BioNorth had refused to pay Meridian $5 million to finish the work that would have captured that value. It was almost poetic. "Karen, have you shared this with Patricia?" "I have, and Patricia is furious. She is trying to restart the manufacturing improvements, but Robert is blocking her. He is saying we need to wait until the financials improve. But the financials are not going to improve unless we fix the operations. It is a vicious cycle." Diana thanked Karen for the information and hung up. She thought about what to do with it. She could keep it to herself, could let BioNorth deal with the consequences of their own bad decisions, or she could use it. Over the next few weeks, Diana started having quiet conversations with people she knew in the pharmaceutical industry. She did not gossip or trash-talk BioNorth. She simply shared, in the course of normal business discussions, that Meridian had worked with BioNorth on an operational transformation, that the work had delivered significant value, but that the engagement had been terminated prematurely due to internal politics, and she let it be known that the termination had cost BioNorth tens of millions of dollars in lost opportunities. Word spread quickly. The pharmaceutical industry was a small world, and people talked. Within a few months, Diana started hearing from other pharmaceutical companies who were interested in working with Meridian. They had heard about the BioNorth engagement. They were impressed with the results, and they wanted to know if Meridian could do something similar for them. One of those companies was a direct competitor of BioNorth, a firm called Apex Pharmaceuticals that was looking to optimize their operations to gain market share. Diana pitched Apex, using the BioNorth case study as proof of Meridian's capabilities. She was careful not to disclose confidential information, but she outlined the approach, the the results, and the lessons learned. Apex was impressed. They hired Meridian for a $20 million engagement, the largest contract Diana had ever landed. And when Apex implemented Meridian's recommendations, they captured over $100 million in value and began taking market share from BioNorth. Meanwhile, BioNorth continued to struggle. Patricia Danvers, frustrated by Robert's resistance to operational improvements, left the company after 18 months to take a CEO role at another firm. Robert was promoted to acting CEO, but the board quickly realized he was not up to the job. Under his leadership, BioNorth's financial performance deteriorated, revenue declined, margins shrank, and competitors like Apex started eating into their market share. 2 years after the termination of the Meridian engagement, BioNorth's board forced Robert Hutchins out. They brought in a new CEO, a man named David Chen, who had a reputation for operational excellence. One of David's first moves was to reach out to Meridian to see if they would be willing to come back and finish the work they had started. Diana took the call, but she was not interested. "David, I appreciate the outreach. But BioNorth burned that bridge when they terminated our engagement and tried to avoid paying what they owed. I do not think it is a good fit. I understand, but I want you to know that I have reviewed the work you did, and it was excellent. The procurement savings alone were game-changing, and the manufacturing recommendations were exactly what we needed. I wish we had listened to you." "So do I, but it is too late now." Diana hung up, and she felt a sense of closure. She had been dismissed, disrespected, and underestimated, but she had walked away with her integrity intact. She had enforced the contract, and she had turned the experience into an opportunity that had ultimately been far more valuable than the original engagement. BioNorth had lost tens of millions of dollars because of Robert Hutchins's bias and arrogance. And Diana had gained a reputation as someone who delivered results and did not tolerate disrespect. 5 years after the BioNorth engagement, Diana was promoted to managing partner at Meridian Strategic Advisors, the first black woman to hold that role in the firm's history. She had earned it through a combination of exceptional client work, business development success, and a track record of building and leading high-performing teams. And one of the first things she did as managing partner was implement a new policy. Meridian would no longer work with clients who did not treat their consultants with respect. If a client dismissed, undermined, or disrespected a Meridian team member, the firm would walk away, even if it meant losing revenue. Diana called it the dignity clause, and it became a cornerstone of Meridian's culture. 10 years after the BioNorth engagement, Diana was invited to give a keynote speech at a conference for women in consulting. She stood on stage in front of 500 women and told the story of Robert Hutchins, the client who had ignored her and directed all his attention to a white male intern. She told them about the decision to walk away, the termination fee, and the long-term consequences for BioNorth. And she told them why it had mattered. "I could have stayed," Diana said, looking out at the audience. "I could have swallowed the disrespect, done the work, and hoped that eventually Robert would come around. But I did not, because I knew that if I stayed in a situation where I was not valued, I would be sending a message to myself, to my team, and to the industry that it was okay to treat me that way. And it is not okay." She paused. "Walking away from BioNorth cost me a $12 million engagement. But it also opened the door to a $20 million engagement with Apex. It established my reputation as someone who would not compromise on values. And it sent a message to every client I have worked with since. If you want to work with Meridian, you need to respect the people doing the work, not because it is politically correct, but because it is good business." The applause was thunderous, and afterward dozens of women came up to Diana to thank her, to share their own stories of being dismissed or disrespected, and to ask for advice on how to navigate similar situations. Diana listened to each of them, And she gave them the same advice. Know your worth, document your value, and be willing to walk away. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave a situation that does not serve you. 15 years after the BioNorth engagement, Diana received a LinkedIn message from Tyler Whitmore, the intern who had been in that first meeting with Robert Hutchins. Tyler had gone on to have a successful career in consulting, and he had recently been promoted to partner at a different firm. Diana, I do not know if you remember me, but I was the intern on the BioNorth engagement 15 years ago. I have thought about that experience many times over the years, and I wanted to reach out and say thank you. Watching how you handled that situation taught me more about leadership and integrity than any business school class ever could. You showed me that it is possible to be successful without compromising your values, and you showed me what it looks like to stand up for yourself and your team, even when it is hard. I have tried to model that in my own career, and I hope I have done justice to the example you set. Thank you. Diana read the message and felt a lump in her throat. She had not thought about Tyler in years, had not known whether that experience had meant anything to him. But apparently it had. She wrote back, Tyler, thank you for reaching out. I remember that meeting well, and I remember that you tried to redirect Robert's attention to me, even when it was uncomfortable. That took courage. I'm glad to hear that you have built a successful career, and I hope you are creating the kind of inclusive culture that I always wished more firms had. Best of luck to you. 20 years after the BioNorth engagement, BioNorth Solutions filed for bankruptcy. The company had never recovered from the operational inefficiencies that Meridian had identified, and under a series of ineffective CEOs, it had lost market share, revenue, and investor confidence. The bankruptcy filing made headlines in the pharmaceutical trade press, and several articles noted that the company's decline had begun around the time it terminated a consulting engagement that had been delivering significant results. One article specifically mentioned the $15 million in procurement savings that had been achieved but not sustained, and the manufacturing improvements that had been recommended but never implemented. Diana read the articles with a sense of sadness. She had never wanted BioNorth to fail. She had wanted to help them succeed, but they had made a choice, and that choice had had consequences. She thought about Robert Hutchins, wondered where he was now, whether he had ever reflected on the role his bias and arrogance had played in the company's downfall. Probably not. People like Robert rarely did. 25 years after the BioNorth engagement, Diana retired from Meridian Strategic Advisors. She had spent 39 years in consulting, the last 15 as managing partner, and she had built Meridian into one of the most respected firms in the industry. Under her leadership, Meridian had grown to over 2,000 employees, offices in 10 countries, and annual revenues exceeding $1 billion. More importantly, Meridian had become known as a firm that valued diversity, that treated its people well, and that refused to compromise on values. The dignity clause was still in effect, and it had become a source of pride for the firm. Employees knew that if a client disrespected them, Meridian would have their back. At Diana's retirement party, held in a ballroom at the Four Seasons in Boston, hundreds of current and former Meridian employees came to celebrate her career. Charles Wainwright, now retired himself, gave a speech. Diana did not just build a successful consulting firm. She built a culture where every person, regardless of their background, their race, their gender, knew that they were valued. And that culture has been Meridian's greatest competitive advantage. Because when people feel valued, they do great work. It is that simple. Diana stood up to give her own remarks, and she looked out at the sea of faces. She saw partners and associates and analysts, black and white and Asian and Latino, men and women and non-binary folks, all of them people she had worked with, mentored, and learned from over the years, and she felt proud. "I have been thinking about what I want to say tonight," Diana began, And I keep coming back to a meeting I had 25 years ago. A meeting with a client who ignored me and only spoke to a white male intern. A meeting where I realized that no amount of competence, no amount of expertise was going to change the way that client saw me. And I had a choice in that moment. I could stay and try to prove myself, or I could walk away and find clients who valued me from the start. She paused. I chose to walk away, and that decision changed my career. It changed Meridian, and I hope it changed the industry. Because I want every young consultant, every woman, every person of color to know that you do not have to tolerate disrespect. You do not have to work twice as hard to get half as far. You can demand to be treated with dignity. And if a client or a company or a colleague will not do that, you can walk away. Because your worth is not determined by how other people see you. It is determined by how you see yourself. The applause was deafening, and as Diana sat down, she felt a sense of peace. She had spent her career fighting for respect, for recognition, for a seat at the table, and she had won. Not because she had changed everyone's minds, but because she had refused to accept anything less than what she deserved. And that, more than any consulting project or business win, was her legacy. 30 years after the BioNorth engagement, Diana was invited to speak at the Harvard Business School as part of a case study on the BioNorth engagement that had become a staple of the leadership curriculum. The case study, titled "The Cost of Disrespect," How Bias Led to a $50 million Loss, detailed the engagement, Robert Hutchins's behavior, the termination, and the long-term consequences for BioNorth. It had become one of the most widely taught cases in the school's history, used to illustrate the business case for diversity and inclusion, the importance of respectful client relationships, and the hidden costs of bias. Diana stood in the same lecture hall where she had been a student 45 years earlier, and she told the story one more time. She told them about the meeting, about Robert's dismissiveness, about the decision to walk away, and she told them about the consequences. The $15 million in procurement savings that could have been sustained but were not. The $40 million in foregone revenue from manufacturing improvements that were never implemented. The competitive losses to firms like Apex that did implement similar changes, and the ultimate bankruptcy of BioNorth, a once promising company that had been destroyed by operational inefficiencies it had refused to address. The case study frames this as a cautionary tale, Diana said. But I want you to understand something. This was not inevitable. BioNorth did not have to fail. They had the resources, the talent, the opportunity to turn things around. But they made a choice. They chose to ignore expertise because it came from someone who did not look like what they expected an expert to look like. And that choice cost them everything. She looked around the room at the students. Many of them women, many of them people of color, all of them at the beginning of their careers. You are going to face moments like this, moments where someone dismisses you, underestimates you, treats you as if you do not belong, and you are going to have to decide how to respond. My advice is this: know your value, document your impact, and be willing to walk away from situations that do not serve you, because the world is full of opportunities, but only if you have the courage to demand what you deserve. The students gave her a standing ovation, and afterward one of them, a young black woman, came up to Diana with tears in her eyes. "Miss Thornton, I needed to hear that. I have been in so many situations where I felt invisible, where I felt like I had to prove myself over and over, and I have been starting to wonder if it is worth it. But hearing your story makes me believe that it is." Diana took the young woman's hand. "It is worth it. But you do not have to do it alone. Build a network, find mentors, support other women and people of color. And remember that your success is not just about you. It is about everyone who comes after you." Diana Thornton passed away at the age of 85, surrounded by her family in her home in Boston. The obituaries noted her achievements: first black woman managing partner at Meridian Strategic Advisors, leader of one of the most successful consulting firms in the country, mentor to hundreds of young professionals. But the thing that people remembered most was her integrity, her refusal to compromise, her willingness to walk away from a lucrative engagement rather than tolerate disrespect, and her belief that dignity was not negotiable. At her memorial service, Karen Whitaker, who had taken over as managing partner after Diana retired, spoke about Diana's legacy. Diana did not just build a business. She built a movement. She showed us that you could be successful without sacrificing your values, that you could demand respect without being labeled difficult, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was walk away. Because walking away is not weakness, it is strength. It is knowing your worth and refusing to settle for anything less. The memorial service was attended by over 1,000 people, including clients, colleagues, competitors, and protégés. And as they filed out of the church, many of them reflected on the lessons Diana had taught them. That competence alone was not enough. That bias had real costs. And that standing up for yourself was not just the right thing to do, it was good business. In the years that followed, the story of Diana Thornton and the BioNorth engagement became legend in the consulting industry. It was taught in business schools, discussed at conferences, and cited in articles about leadership and diversity. And it became a touchstone for anyone who had ever been dismissed or underestimated because of their race or gender. Because Diana had shown that you did not have to accept disrespect. You could walk away. And in walking away, you could build something far greater than what you left behind. The Meridian Strategic Advisors that Diana built continued to thrive, guided by the principles she had established: excellence, integrity, and dignity. The dignity clause remained in effect, a reminder that some things were more important than revenue. And every year, the firm awarded the Diana Thornton Fellowship to a young consultant who exemplified her values: competence, courage, and a refusal to compromise. And somewhere in the archives of the Harvard Business School, the case study on the BioNorth engagement continued to be taught to new generations of students. The case ended with a question: if you were in Diana Thornton's position, what would you have done? And every year, students debated, discussed, and learned. Some said they would have stayed and fought. Some said they would have escalated to the board. But an increasing number said they would have done exactly what Diana did: walked away, enforced the contract, and used the experience to build something better. Because that was Diana Thornton's legacy, not just what she accomplished, but what she taught. That your worth is not determined by how others see you. That respect is not optional, and that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to walk away from people who do not value you and toward opportunities that do. That was the lesson, that was the legacy, and that was why, decades after her death, people still told the story of the black executive who was ignored in favor of a white intern, and who responded by walking away with her dignity intact and costing the client $15 million, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of self-respect. And in doing so, changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who came after her. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who has been dismissed or underestimated or made to feel invisible, because the lesson here is not just about one woman or one engagement or one company. It is about the belief that we all deserve to be treated with dignity, that our expertise and our contributions matter, and that we have the power to demand better, to walk away from situations that diminish us, and to build lives and careers that reflect our true worth. That is Diana Thornton's gift to all of us, and that is a legacy that will never die.